In this video, we're going to look at how to create a type of design that's featured on the CocoaPress website. To look at CocoaPress as examples, you can go to cocoapress.com and click the gallery link. So I'm going to click the first image, and we see that these are all basic, simple squares, but the insides are very different and interesting geometric shapes. And we also notice that we can see straight through the bottom of the print. So each of these designs has no top and no bottom. Even though these designs are quite complex and visually interesting, in fact, they're fairly easy to create. Let's take a look at another example of the same type of print. Here you can clearly see that the print has no top and no bottom. It's standing on its edge, and you can see right through from front to back. Very interesting effect. Let's take a look at a few more examples. Here's a whole bunch of printed examples printed in dark milk and white chocolate. Again, they're all simple squares as the basic design, but the interior geometric patterns create a lot of visual interest and also would be an interesting texture to bite into. The last image we'll look at shows a presentation example. But notice on these that there is a bottom layer that may be there to give the shape a little more firmness so it doesn't crumble in your fingers when you hold it. Notice on the top right-hand example, you see that the interior infill lines are very thin, and you can see that the outer perimeter is two layers or two walls, two shells. And looking at the example directly to the left, on the top left, you can see that honeycomb shape. The interior infill lines look a lot thicker than the example on the right. And the outer wall, if you look very carefully, you can see it is still two shells, but it's much thicker than the two shells on the right. And so that indicates to me that the print on the left, the upper left, was printed using a 1.6 millimeter nozzle, and the print on the upper right was printed using a 0.8 millimeter nozzle. So we'll keep that in mind as we're creating our own examples. Okay, we'll exit out of this and go into PrusaSlicer. In PrusaSlicer, first we'll verify on the far right that we're using the CocoaPress 0.8 millimeter nozzle and that the layer height is 0.5 millimeters. Next, we'll right-click or control-click on the print bed to add a shape, and we'll choose cylinder. We can change the size of the cylinder over on the bottom right-hand side. We'll make the cylinder, say, 50 millimeters, and when I tap enter, the other dimensions are changed proportionally because they are locked together. But I don't want the height of the cylinder to be that high, so I'm going to click the lock to unlock it, and then for the Z dimension, which is the height, I'm going to type in 10. So we'll have a flat cylindrical shape. Next, I'm going to right-click or control-click on the object, scroll down until I see infill and choose infill. Now, if I click on infill on the right-hand side, notice I can change the density of the infill and the pattern of the infill. So let's just click and see what we get. Down at the very bottom right, I'll click Slice Now, and it looks like there's nothing happening. But if I use the scroll bar on the right-hand side and go down, you can see that the infill is indeed a grid pattern, and it's 25%, meaning that 25% of the inside is a chocolate grid, and 75% is just air. But that's not what we want. We want to be able to see through the print. So what we're going to do is go up to the Print Settings menu, click on Layers and Perimeters, and where it says horizontal shells, solid layers, top and bottom, we'll change both of those to 0. So there will be no top layers, no bottom layers. And remember from the photo that used the 0.8 millimeter nozzle that it had two perimeters or outer shells. That looked very delicate, so I'm going to go ahead and add an extra perimeter there. And I'm also going to change the first layer height to match the regular layer height of 0.5. Now we'll click Plater to go back to the plater, and again on the bottom right-hand side, we'll click Slice Now. Okay, so now you can see that we see right through the print. It has no top and no bottom. We see that it has 3 walls or 3 perimeters. That's good. But let's see what we can do with the infill. I'm going to change the infill pattern from grid to stars and click Slice Now. Okay, that's an interesting pattern, but let's say I would like those spaces to be larger. I'd like to fill those spaces with some sort of confection. So I can change, again, on the right-hand side, I'll change from 25% to, let's say, 15%, and then click Slice Now again. Okay, so that looks more like what I was after. Now you can play with the infill percentages and the infill patterns as much as you like. Once you find a pattern that you like and would like to print, on the bottom right-hand side, click Export G-Code, choose your SD card. We'll change the file name from shape cylinder to stars because that's the pattern I'm using. And I'm also going to add the percentage so that I know later, 15%, and click Save. So now if I look at my SD card, I can see the file that I just exported. Now I could eject this SD card, plug it into the CocoaPress Chocolate 3D printer, and start my print. And this is the resulting print. You can see that it has very thin lines in the middle. There are 3 outer perimeters. And looking at the print from the bottom, you can see that it's smoother because it's on the smooth print bed surface. Let's try making this shape. Notice here the inner lines are much thicker, the infill is thicker, and I have only 2 walls, but they're both thick. So what I've done here is I've switched from the 0.8 millimeter nozzle to the 1.6 millimeter nozzle. And this is what the shape looks like from the bottom. In PrusaSlicer, we're going to first change the nozzle size. So on the right-hand side, we'll change from 0.8 to 1.6. Now it's going to ask us if we want to transfer all of our settings. Say yes, transfer, and click Slice Now. You can see that I still have 3 walls from earlier, so I'm going to go back to print settings, and I'm going to knock the perimeters down to 2. And while I'm here, I'm going to change the first layer to 1 to match the layer height right above it. We still want 0 solid layers on the top and the bottom of the print though, so we'll leave those settings as is. We'll click Plater, click Slice Now. That's an interesting shape, but we want to produce the square geometric shape that we saw, and I happen to know that that is the Hilbert curve. I'll click Slice Now. That's okay, but I would like it to be a little more refined, so I'm going to choose 25% and Slice Now. There we go. I like that. Kind of a square maze shape. Again, if I'm happy with that and I want to print it, on the bottom right, I'll click Export G-Code. I'll change the name of the file. I would like to know what infill pattern I use, so I'm going to use that in the file name, Hilbert curve, and I'd also like to know the percentage that I'm using of infill, so I'll type in 25 PC for percent. Make sure to select my SD card and click Save. Now let's create this shape. Again, it has 2 thick perimeter walls, so we're using the 1.6 millimeter nozzle, but it has a sort of crisscrossing shape in the middle. It's hard to tell what the pattern is because those top lines are not melted together, but if we look at it from the bottom, you can clearly see that this is a honeycomb pattern. So how do we create this? Back in PrusaSlicer, we'll change the pattern from Hilbert curve to honeycomb and click Slice Now. And there it is. Actually, that looks good just the way it is, but you could change the percent of the infill density if you wish to make it more dense or less dense. I'll say I'm happy with that, so I'll click Export. Type in the file name, and I'm using the infill pattern as the file name, and the percentage again is 25%. Choose the SD card and click Save. Now to change things up a little bit, we're going to work with a square. We're going to stick with the 1.6 millimeter nozzle. You can see the nice thick outer walls and the thick infill pattern in the interior. And this is what the shape looks like from the bottom, flattened out because it's on the print bed. So back in PrusaSlicer, we need to change the cylinder to a square. So in the bottom right-hand corner, we'll click Editor View, And I'm going to click on the cylinder and click the trash can to delete it. Now you can right click or control click on the print bed to add a shape. This time we'll add a box. And on the bottom right hand side, we'll check the lock to scale it proportionally, and we'll say 40 by 40 by 40, but that's too tall, so we'll unlock the proportions, and for the Z height, we'll change that to a 10. Okay, now we'll right click or control click on the object, scroll down, and click infill. That adds the infill option on the right hand side. So now we can click on infill, and this time to produce the effect we were looking at, we're going to use the octagram spiral, and it was set at 25% to get the picture that we saw. I'll click Slice Now, and there it is. Once again, on the bottom right, we'll click Export G-Code. We'll change the file name to the infill pattern, octagram spiral, and the percent is 25%. Choose the SD card and click Save. And as a review, these are the final printed shapes.